Well, today we are going to talk about policy analysis. I was told that it would be a good idea to talk about some introductory basics, but with a focus on think tanks. I would like to make it more interesting and more valuable for you. So I prepared a bit of introduction, but more of our gatherings I hope we will do in relation to a very highly silent issue today, namely migrations. So I hope that you will be collaborating with me. You can always pose questions or give me your response while I'm lecturing. But especially I would like your response when we come to looking into specific cases. So a bit later we are going to work also in groups and then hopefully come together and discuss some things you have come up while discussing the material. I believe most of you are coming from former Yugoslav republics, and like people in all Slavic countries and also in Germany, we have, like it was already said, a very specific attitude toward the word politics. And with policy analysis, it is a big problem in these countries because policy as a special term has been developed in a democratic context, and these languages don't really have a proper distinction in language for politics, polity, and policy. So today, probably we will come across of all the three terms, and perhaps it would be a good idea sometimes to refer to our languages to say what we are talking about exactly, because there are also some interferences. For a start, I would like to say a few things with regard to certain slides, but I will not go through all the lines. So if you want anything to be discussed into details, please just let me know. What I would like to state in this meeting is that policy analysis has been developed in frame of the nation state first. But what we are dealing with today is very much globalized. Everything you look at is to some extent linked to the globalization processes, directly or indirectly. So both my lecturing and the case I have chosen for work has in fact global dimensions. But to start with some basic definitions in order to understand each other better, in fact, we should start with a nation state. And basically, it was not a good idea or, I don't know, a dream of politicians to use knowledge when deciding about how to manage societies, but rather it was the complexity of social problems that had started occurring in the 19th century, which made decision-making very difficult without the proper basics. Also, if you look at the various scientific contributions at that time, you could see that many of disciplines were developed to a rather high level, including quantitative methods. But each of them looked at particular social problems from their angles. So what was missing was basically look at the complex social problems in a complex way in order to develop knowledge that would be good enough for making wise policy decisions. With regard to think tanks you are very much interested in today, it should also be stated that first think tanks, in fact, started developing in the 19th century in countries that were very much modernized at that time already. So guess who should be mentioned first? Great Britain. While when we look at the more global picture, actually we can only say that think tanks started to develop after 1970s. And more recently, after a big proliferation, I have found some estimations that they have started to decline. So I guess your initiative is somehow focusing on that fact, which is very wise because social problems are not becoming simpler, but even more complex. And the knowledge needed to grasp the causality of how they are developed, and based on that, how they could be solved, is even more complex today. So just in order to understand each other, what we are talking about today is policy, public policy. In Slavic languages, it would be, recently we started to translate it in Slovenia, for example, and our Croat colleagues have been following us. We translate it as javna politika, like public policies. Also, but we were able to distinguish among politics and policy while adding some adjectives like healthcare policy, zdravstvena politika, and so on, or in plural, politike, policies. When we look at, just briefly, I will show you a definition just to make sure that we are talking about the same thing. Yeah, but Latin languages are more sophisticated, and in terms of, I haven't refreshed my memory about that, but I know that from Latin you can distinguish a variety of words starting with polit, but you come as far as to police and polity and politics and so on. We can't do that in Slavic languages. So just to refer to public policy, this is one of the definitions. So basically what we should say today is that public policy is something governments can adopt, but they need knowledge in the process of making policies. So think tanks are just one of the possible sources. And what is additionally interesting is that public policy is not only what ministers or prime ministers do or laws adopted by parliaments. It's also about decisions made by all actors that are included into implementation of policy, because there is a chain of decisions that are adopted while policy is to reach, let's say, targets of certain policies. So what is policy analysis? This is the definition that was developed in the context of nation state and in the context where the governments were mainly those who could have afforded having special think tanks or special analysis commissioned. While more recently, policy analysis has become more complex and has started to reflect also some trends in democratization. So basically, especially in the context of globalization, this definition should be more appropriate. So policy analysis is not to be only knowledge speaking the truth to power, but increasingly it is also the knowledge that should support influences on public policies by other actors, non-governmental actors, and also broader public. So far, I think we have come to terms of our basic understandings, what we are talking about. And so far, I believe you are already into this issue that much that I don't need to go into details while talking about who are policy actors at all. beside what I have already mentioned. But what needs to be added also when we have in mind the role of the think tanks is that policy analysis does have the rational basis, and it should be objective in terms of doing expertise in an academically appropriate way, meaning that it must not invent any data or any outcome of data processing. It should be objective in terms of that anybody who could go, who would like to do the same analysis once more with all the data, he or she should come to the same conclusions. But when the specific role of think tanks comes in, is the question of values. Students usually look at me very strangely when I say policy analysis is a science or interdisciplinary science. It is an academic discipline, but it is based on values, because they think if you are objective, you should have no values. Well, wrong. Even natural sciences quite often could interfere into social life with, let's say, value-free analysis. But once their work is committed to, let's say, to some policies or to make certain policies that are not democratic work, they are value-burdened as scientists as well. Perhaps if we look at policy analysis from its start, it was in fact established by Laswell's text published in 1951. It comes as a no surprise that it was explicitly referring to basic values coming out of the experience of the World War II and the spread of democracy all over the world. So in a way we can say, yes, policy analysis is based on values of democracy, human rights, and so on. But not only that, there are some particular stresses on the fact that policy analysis should work for the well-being of individuals. Policy analysis should always have to take into account that individuals should have some alternatives, some options when they are involved into policy making. For example, just briefly, even when the state has healthcare policy and you know that you can only have one medical doctor where you're registered, you still should have an option who your medical doctor is, for example. This is at least the minimum. What is also very clear is that policy analysis or policy analysis as a discipline should or has some ethics. Policy analysts, unlike lawyers, for example, according to Laswell or Laswellian policy analysis, are not supposed to work in favor of policies that are racist, that are against particular human rights, or they are against democracy, welfare, against the respect of the dignity of human being. So when we talk about good policy, this is the minimum. But still, in democratic context where ideas and political actors are plural, you also have some pluralism in defining when a particular policy is good and when it's not. So even when we have Laswellian basis altogether, we still may have some pluralism, some variations in stressing, for example, the hierarchy of values we take into account. This is just a slide to remind us that while policy analysis was actually started in frame of the nation states are now only some actors among many others that are dealing with problems that are increasingly global and cannot be solved only by a particular country. Also, there are some problems that are global in terms of specific values, but not in line with some other values. So today we are going to talk about migration, and you could see that some countries still try to see these problems as problems of a particular country or problem of the EU, and only take into account dimensions or variables that matter to this narrower definition of a policy community or a policy or a state in various terms. However, policy problems have grown beyond these borders, and this includes the case we are going to look at later, the question of migration. Here, perhaps I should only stress one more thing, that unlike on the state level or supranational political system like the EU, on the global level we don't have a state as yet, but the states and various organizations do collaborate and do try to coordinate some policies that are then implemented also in nation states. Okay, I have already talked a little bit about the role of policy analysts and policy analysis. What I would like to add here is that during the course of time, policy analysis and policy analysts have adapted to their environments. So we have a variety of types of behavior and variety of organizations that are thought to be think tanks. I assume that today you're coming basically from think tanks that are not parts of the government, although they do exist. You also have policy analysis knowledge within governments in form of particular individual experts beside particular units. I'm sure all governments have particular units that are very much concerned with economic policies, but there may be also some others closer to the government or more in the arm's length, the Brits would say. Increasingly, we can find think tanks that are close to particular civil society actors, or it would be perhaps more appropriately said that are close to particular organized economic interests, because NGOs usually don't have as much resources that would afford special think tanks to work with them. But beside that, we also have some think tanks that want to be independent, and that their focus is basically the space between between the society and the state. So they want to work in the public space and allow a broad information to everybody who is interested in. Of course, it might be very difficult to be independent. So I asked a colleague of mine who leads that kind of institute, and she said basically that what they can do is that they try to rely on resources that are very much spread, that they are not dependent on any source in particular. But the problem with that is that they spend lots of time on gathering these sources, so they can't spend as much time as they want to on actual doing policy analysis and disseminating it. Yeah, I would only add 2 points here. With regard to ethics of policy analysis, in some countries, there are already professional associations which try to make sure that policy analysis is a profession which not only takes care of of special interests of people who are in the same profession, but they also take care of certain standards and also in a way of policing, taking care that they're also, that these standards are also respected. With regard to mobilizing power of policy analysis and think tanks, my guess would be that currently there are still governments who have enough resources and increasingly also multinational corporations which could afford to have special think tanks, and they try to influence their organization, and I'm sure there are also some pressures on how policy analysis is done. But there are also some attempts to counterbalance this kind of think tank works in the global context. However, there are big distinctions, big variations also when we look at the more developed parts of the world. For example, probably it could still be said that most of think tanks are based in the US, and then Great Britain. With the delay, they started to develop in Germany and in Scandinavian countries. I'm sorry to say that the post-communist region is still very poor with that, and there may be several reasons for that. We'll see, perhaps later we will discuss that into detail. Yeah, I think it would be best that we go to the case study because while looking at a particular social problem, we can see all the aspects of policy analysis and activities of think tanks in a more illustrative way. As I mentioned earlier, I decided that it would be a good idea to look at migrations because they are a global phenomena and they are related to many social problems. Before we go and look at some material, I hope we can agree that about what a social problem is. Usually it is described as a kind of discrepancy or a gap between the existing situation or trend in society compared to which situation or trend is desirable. So the problem is the gap. Usually I have struggles with my students when they try to define the object of their study and they say, oh, the problem is social policy, where what is the problem? So that the social policy exists or what? So it should be a very particular gap that we are addressing but you can't do that without values. For example, if you look at the predominant values in the United States, and let's just keep social policy as an example, according to public opinion polls, Americans are very unhappy about the poverty. They think that all people deserve to live in humane conditions, but when you ask them about the role of the government, would they support a stronger role of government? Would they support higher taxes and redistributive policies? No, that's not an option. Unlike Europe, where social policy is considered to be not only acceptable, but highly desirable. It's more or less, I think, a question what you can afford. How much resources you have for that. So just an example, as we are in Slovenia, in the past, Slovenes would say, well, we want it to be like Switzerland. If you ask people now, they say we would like to be like Scandinavian countries. having a bit of socialism, but also some democracy, a nice combination would do well. Socialism in terms of, rich welfare state, in terms of social policies. Okay, let's go to the case study. For the beginning, I will show you some slides from the latest report by United Nations on migration. It was published in September last month. And I selected only a few slides just to give you an illustrative impression of what we are talking about in the global context. In the second step, I will ask you to look at two very short texts, and then we will come together and talk about framing these policies. And later we will go to working groups with another material. Okay, so let's start with some slides. So this is the global picture of migrations. And you can see there are migrations all over the world, but there are some specific directions where migrations are stronger. And analysts in the United Nations think tank, so this is another picture, and you can see that 40% of people move from the south to the north, from the north to the south. And people also migrate within the north and within the south. If we go a little bit further, these are some key findings that somehow relate migrations to some other phenomena. Things like poverty and other more specific issues or problems are not mentioned here, but I guess they could be implied in these lines. What is important for our today's discussion is there are several findings based on various methodologies, including also public opinion surveys. And obviously, it is quite clear why migrants to the north are coming in biggest numbers. They are heading toward the largest gains, while migrations within the similar countries are not so rewarding. So what is also important that migrants coming to the north, for example, can gain in material aspects quite a lot, but are facing some other problems. I will just show you the last slide. So this is the basic summing up. And I will only shift now to the question of framing. So obviously, these migrations do happen, but how they are perceived, how they are defined, is very much linked to values or to policy framing. So now I'm introducing a new term, policy framing. We are going to work more also in groups. Policy framing is basically about narratives, about, let's say, explanations or interpretations of social problems or policy problems. What basically are they? And usually they are linked to using specific phrases, specific words. That's all together is called or named framing. The same issue, as I said, could be framed in various ways, and also think tanks or various governments or politicians, individual politicians, frame the same thing in a various way. I have here 2 examples of framing, and I hope you would be as kind as to read them, and we can discuss them a bit in this form, and later I have some more material, and we could move toward working into groups.
Odessa, Ukraine. From here and elsewhere, every year 1.6 million migrants make their way to the European Union, which makes immigration the main source of population growth, much more than the difference between births and deaths in the EU. And as Europe is growing older, immigration is vital to make up the shortage of manpower, to increase cultural diversity and stimulate growth. But alongside legal migration, illegal migration can go hand in hand with criminal or illicit activities and the violation of human rights. So is migration a good or a bad thing for Europe? With its vast external land border, the European Union has many points of entry. One of the main ones is the route from the east, and it's here that the European Union has decided to launch its global approach to migration, a comprehensive approach already used in the south with Africa. So how does it work? The objectives of the new strategy are to promote legal migration channels, to prevent illegal immigration, and to maximize the positive effects of migration on the development of the country of origin. And this is being done in close partnership with countries of origin and transit. Until now, this is what has happened. This is the small border town of Chop in Ukraine. From here, it's easy to reach 4 European countries: Romania, Hungary, Slovakia and Poland, through forests or over the mountains. Although very often the journey for illegal migrants stops here in this sort of reception center.
Наибольшее количество мигрантов – Грузия, Молдова, Китай, Афганистан, Пакистан. Это Индия. Это то, что при них нет никаких документов.
NGOs like this one, financed by the European Union, welcome and support migrants in transit. Washing kits are distributed, as well as familiar food and clothing. Among them are people who are fleeing their home country because of conflict or persecution. They can therefore seek asylum. Here they receive protection and legal assistance. Longer-term activities are underway with the national authorities to improve the reception conditions and to look after the migrants and asylum seekers. But it's at an earlier stage that the EU is also putting in place the key elements of its strategy for managing migration flows. Let's go to Odessa to see the scheme in action. It's daybreak over the port. The headquarters of the European project UBAM is here in Odessa. Its aim is to put in place an integrated border management system at the gates of Europe to facilitate legal mobility while fighting against illegal movements.
Egyik prioritás a misszió tevékenységének segíteni a moldáv és az ukrán hatóságokat, főleg az illegális migráció azonosításában, embercsempészetben, és hát az ehhez kapcsolódó bűnügyi vizsgálatok kialakításában, főleg a nemzetközi szintéren.
The European experts deployed in the field have been chosen from all the countries of the European Union. Jean-Pierre Albarelli is one of them.
Nous approchons du poste frontière le plus important de la région, entre l'Ukraine et la Moldavie, avec grosso modo 3 millions de passagers par an.
Très concrètement, c'est une mission de conseil et d'assistance à nos collègues ukrainiens et moldaves, afin de les accompagner sur leur chemin vers les standards européens de gestion des frontières. Ils en sont encore au concept de garder une frontière, puisqu'ils s'appellent toujours des bords de garance, et nous les emmenons, nous les accompagnons vers la notion de management des frontières ou gestion des frontières. Manager une frontière, c'est la garder où et quand c'est nécessaire.
At the border post, it's very straightforward. Pedestrians pass through the yellow lanes to be checked. The vehicles are separated by category and examined by the Ukrainian guards. The UBAM experts don't carry out any checks themselves as they don't have executive powers. But here on the ground, they can observe and propose techniques and give advice to the border guards. Only the travellers and vehicles given the green light can cross the bridge.
Красная линия у нас обозначает, что здесь, на данной местности, показывает государственная граница. То есть до этой линии это Украина, за этой линией это уже Республика Молдова. Ну, значит, борьба с нелегальной миграцией – это один из основных, скажем так, задач, которые стоят перед государственной пограничной службой. На данном участке у нас есть, как, скажем так, это следование граждан Молдовы с целью легального выезда в иностранные страны Европы.
But that's not all. The work is also to fight against criminal networks made rich through trafficking in human beings and smuggling. So using international coordination, inquiries are carried out on the ground and an analysis made of areas at risk. We're leaving Ukraine to go to the heart of Moldova and its capital, Chisinau. Here, a large number of people would like to migrate, albeit temporarily. Even if no one is prepared to say as much openly, the advertisements in the street express people's real feelings. So, alongside the efforts deployed against illegal migration, the European approach is also to promote legal migration channels.
I flussi migratori verso l'Unione Europea sono una grandissima opportunità. Il trucco consiste nel gestire questi flussi migratori ed evitare che siano anarchici e del tutto incontrollati.
Concrete proof of this approach is that in 2008, Moldova signed a mobility partnership with the European Community and 15 European countries. On the ground, this partnership has already resulted in measures to give people better information about legal migration channels and on work opportunities abroad, but also help for those who want to come back to find work and to use their experience acquired abroad.
Nu befinner vi oss i ett jobbexpo fungerar som en informationspunkt som ger information till jobbsökande och arbetsgivare. Det kommer också att tjäna som en brygga över till det nya EU-projektet som Svenska arbetsförmedlingen har fått ansvar att implementera. Ett migrationsprojekt där vi försöker hjälpa moldaver i utlandet att komma hem och hitta jobb och de som funderar på att flytta ut att göra det på ett lagligt sätt.
Tamara is one of the people who could benefit directly from this European project.
Am plecat 6 ani și am lucrat legal în Israel. Am lucrat legal și după 6 ani m-am întors înapoi în Moldova.
The money which Tamara was able to save abroad as a carer for the elderly allowed her to buy a small apartment in the outskirts of the capital where she lives with her son. She's now thinking of working for a few years in Moldova before perhaps going abroad again. She plans to use the new advice and assistance services which the European project will offer.
Eu consider că acest proiect este binevenit pentru moldoveni, fiindcă am multe prieteni care pleacă după hotare, ele plătesc în jurul la 4.000 de euro acum și pleacă ilegal în orice țară din Europa, care au mers în apă rece la jumătate, care au mers acoperite în cutii de carton.
The global approach proposed by the European Union has been warmly welcomed by the Moldovan government.
Evident că migrația forței de muncă trebuie să fie benefică atât pentru țara de origine, cât și pentru țara de destinație. În anul 2008, suma remitențelor a depășit cifra de 1,6 miliarde de dolari americani și fiind în creștere față de anul 2007. De surse financiare transmise din străinătate beneficiază circa 40% din gospodăriile casnice.
The Mobility Partnership also includes schemes to encourage migrants to participate in the development of their country by making it easier for them to transfer money back home and put it to a productive use. Certain sectors of the Moldovan economy are already growing fast. One sure sign is the appearance of so many construction sites. Another symbol of the changes taking place is the big shopping centre in the heart of the capital, the Moldova. Perhaps a call to return home. This young Moldovan couple living in Brussels are still deeply attached to Moldova. Vadim is working as a consultant and Christina studies at Antwerp University.
Nu este ușor, dar se merită să faci asta, pentru că dacă să luăm rezultatele în termen lung, atunci e bine să investești în educație, să investești în tine ca să poți oferi mai mult când mergi înapoi acasă.
So can migration be an opportunity for migrants, their home countries and the countries of destination? There's still a lot to be done, but that's what can be brought about by the global approach to migration being put in place by the European Union and its partners to the east, as well as in other regions of the world.
Però non infangate le persone che hanno collaborato a salvare queste vite umane. E la mia rabbia è solo questa, che adesso loro sono i bravi, sono quelli che hanno risolto il mondo e hanno salvato le vite. E noi siamo i coglioni che abbiamo messo a bordo 47 persone, che volevamo continuare a prendere queste persone e si sono rifiutati di trasbordare su una barca di una certa importanza. Io ero a filo d'acqua con la mia barca, eravamo in 55 sulla mia barca, non eravamo 2 persone. Si sono rifiutati perché il protocollo non lo permette. A un certo punto ho detto io vado in porto, no, lei di qua non si deve muovere, dobbiamo dargli noi l'autorizzazione ad andare in porto. Ho detto guardi che lei non ha capito niente, io vado in porto, faccio quello che vuole. Sono partito e sono venuto in porto a scaricare queste persone. Non so se vi rendete conto, vedere il mare che bolliva di persone umane, di gente che chiedeva aiuto, ma poi alla fine ci siamo accorti che ormai le persone ne mancavano poche a essere salvate. Se andavamo fuori non ci sarebbe stato più nessuno, li avevano tutti presi. Basta, questo è quanto.